Felicity, I could see it, and I have to tell you, you don't see President Barack Obama like that. Now, I've heard the line before in a tragedy that it's time for all of us, especially as parents, to go home and hug our kids a little bit tighter and make sure that they know that they're loved. What you do not see is President Barack Obama tearing up on camera, having to pause as he talks about the children in the future that they won't have. I have to say I'm struck because I was hoping against hope that all these anonymous reports wouldn't be true, but the president to come out and to show that kind of emotion does make me think that in fact the initial reports are true, and as many as 18 children, small children between the ages of 5 and 10, could actually be dead in this tragedy, and mentioning of course the adults as well, the teachers. So now the question becomes, what does the president do with this emotion? What does the president do with what will become possibly a rallying cry for Americans? We've seen movie theater shootings, we've seen shootings at malls. We have not in decades seen anyone walk into an elementary school, a kindergarten classroom, and then open fire on small children. Now the question does that translate into the political will to go up against the National Rifle Association, one of the most powerful lobbies in this town? The president did seem determined, but again, we've heard him say to Americans, go home, hug your kids a little bit tighter. We haven't seen him take on that lobby or push through any legislation which would make it even remotely harder to get a gun in this country.
Yeah, Paddy, the flag on the White House flying at half-mast behind you, and I think actually there has been an order that US flags should indeed be flying at half-mast. I think I saw it on Twitter until December the 18th.
Exactly, and the Congress is going to do the same thing on Capitol Hill. The president ordered the flags here. This will, I have to say, this is an issue that really does divide Americans, the Second Amendment. The laws vary from state to state. There was one state that just marked its millionth permit to carry a concealed weapon. Well, there are other states that have tried unsuccessfully in the courts to crack down on the ability to own a gun in your home, to carry it on your person. So the states are very varied in what is allowed when it comes to gun ownership. It really has been the domain of the individual states. There was a ban for a temporary ban. It didn't last more than a decade on assault weapons. And if it's true that this shooter did in fact have an assault weapon, it would be the equivalent of what you see the U.S. Army carry into combat. The question then becomes, should any regular person be allowed to buy a gun that can do that much damage in that short amount of time? It's been the question that has been asked since Columbine. It was the question that was asked after Virginia Tech. Again, all students that were impacted, but this will hit home a little bit differently. These are children between the ages of 5 and 10, as the president said. The majority of the victims are children. And you can just picture the innocence in that classroom and what chaos must have been if this person did in fact go in with an assault weapon, the same thing that you would see American troops carry on the streets of Iraq or Afghanistan. But again, the question becomes, what will the politicians do about it? They always talk after these tragedies about doing something about gun control. There has never been a serious push under the Obama administration to do what he said that he wanted to do, which is to continue the ban on assault weapons. So the question becomes, does this emotion that we've just seen from the president, which is so unusual for him, he doesn't show emotion in public, obviously tearing up, having to take some time to talk about it, does that translate into a desire to change the laws of the land? We're going to have to wait and see.
You know what's going to be interesting, Patty, is that all the US talk shows, which will debate obviously endlessly the gun laws following this tragedy, they will be asking members of the National Rifle Association to come in and defend the gun laws as they stand. That's going to be quite a difficult thing for the NRA to do in the wake of all of this, I think.
Well, actually, in every tragedy, you see the lobby and you see gun enthusiasts and those who believe the Second Amendment does ensure their right to carry assault weapons. They come out and they say the same thing. It's become a bit of a catchphrase, but they say guns don't kill people. People kill people. And they talk about the vast majority of gun owners, and this is something the president often says, the vast majority of gun owners in this country are lawful, abiding citizens that want guns to protect their homes or to be able to hunt. The question becomes, and I think this is hard for people in other countries to understand, gun ownership is very widespread in this country. It's not as if there are just a few guns lying about and you could collect them. It is a huge industry. A lot of people own guns. They have them in their home. In essence, the question becomes, how do you put that genie back in the bottle? Where do you draw the line? Do you try to make guns more expensive? That's something that's been bandied about in Washington. Do you ban assault weapons? Do you try to make background checks a little bit harder? There's all sorts of loopholes when it comes to gun shows, and the laws are very specific. And as I mentioned, they're varied by state. You can buy a gun in Florida and possibly not buy one in Maryland. It just depends on where you live. Does this become the realm of the federal government? Is there the political will in this town that is so incredibly divided? Think about this. They're in this fiscal cliff, this financial dealings. They're all talking about going over this fiscal cliff, sending the economy into a recession. They can't agree on budget numbers. Now, how are they going to get their constituents to agree on an issue that is so emotional to the American public, something, as the president calls it, as sacred as gun ownership? The question remains, will this change the equation for the American public? When we start hearing the stories of those children that were slaughtered in their classrooms, when we see their pictures, when we see their families grieving, will that change the equation? We have had Columbine, we've had Virginia Tech, we've seen these funerals in the past. We have not seen the laws change. The question becomes, will this do that?
Absolutely. That's Al Jazeera's Paddy Culhane live outside the White House in Washington, D.C. Thanks, Paddy.